Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 571. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone, and today I'm joined by Matthew Ho. Matt, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Kyle, thanks for having me back on.
Very happy to have you back on here. It's been a while. I had you on episode 200. It's one of mine and one of my listeners' favorite episodes of the show. We really go over kind of your story in that episode, talk about your role as a whistleblower and trying to prevent the surge in Afghanistan and predicting the failure there. Your work, talking to Democrats and people within the Democrat Party and the entire Democrat caucus and really rallying them against the war before Nancy Pelosi undermined you on that one. There's a lot of really great stuff that you were able to share with us. And I recommend everybody check out that episode. And it's actually the one I have tagged on the Conflicts of Interest YouTube page. So if you go there, you can find that very easily. Matt, today I want to talk to you about quite a few other things that you have going on. I guess one, though, is a little bit in the past. It was your campaign for Senate with the Green Party, and you had some legal business with the Democratic parties, and I believe you've now won.
Right. Well, we've won multiple times now. So myself and my colleagues are 3-0 in federal court against the Democratic Party. So what occurred was 2 years ago when I was running for U.S. Senate as a Green Party member, we had to petition to get ballot access. And we successfully did that. We collected 22,500 signatures, and we needed 13,865. So we were well over the threshold required. And after we presented our signatures to the State Board of Elections, we were denied our ability to be on the ballot because they claimed we were committing fraud. And the Democratic Party got involved, specifically a Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, so Chuck Schumer's outfit. And if people are familiar with Mark Elias, he is the top Democratic Party attorney. His law firm intervened as well, and we had to go to federal court to get on the ballot. We won at U.S. District Court, and then we won again in federal appeals court because the Democratic Party appealed their loss. And the federal appeals court, of course, ruled in favor of us, and we were on the ballot. We have since been in court arguing for damages, and we received those damages in the form of attorney's fees, which is fine, but that's not the point. The point is that when in our pursuit of damages, we were able to conclusively the Democratic Party lied, they slandered, they made things up. And in the U.S. District Court ruling in our favor that just came out a couple weeks ago, that's what the court said. The court said that the Democratic Party's actions in trying to keep us off the ballot, including their involvement in court, not just on the federal level, but on the state level, was frivolous and without foundation, basically saying that they were lying. And that there's no merit to what they were accusing us of. And that's in fact what they did. They slandered us. They said that we were committing fraud. We never committed fraud. There was never any evidence of us committing fraud, but it was enough to cause us to have to go to court. And I think they had a twofold strategy of, one, maybe they'll be successful and keep us off the ballot through this type of legal action. But then the other was can we, if we're not successful, can we get these guys to exhaust themselves to make it so that they can't campaign? And it did. We lost a few months of our campaign having to focus on the court cases. But, the big thing for us was we did get onto the ballot. It established a precedent here in North Carolina. So as you're seeing all these other campaigns and parties right now line up across the country to get ballot access, whether it's Bobby Kennedy Jr.'s campaign, whether it's Cornel West's campaign, you're seeing this ballot access effort that we've not seen in quite a while in the U.S. There is this precedent now here in North Carolina where not only did we establish our right to be on the ballot, but we also showed that the Democratic Party committed fraud themselves in trying to keep us off the ballot. And hopefully that can be utilized across the country, because it was a federal ruling, to help whether it's third parties or independent candidates, regardless of what their positions are, because I certainly am not going to vote for Bobby Kennedy, particularly with his views on Palestine and Israel. But I do also believe he should be on the ballot. It's important for our country to have a multi-party democracy. It's important for voters to have actual choice at the ballot box. And so hopefully, again, our Carolina will be of use to others across the country.
Yeah, so I guess a couple things. One is it seems our elected leaders really want us to just kind of get over it and assume that we do have to just choose between whoever they put up for it. But
Right.
two, I think some people might think of this as a little bit of a surprise. I mean, you were running in the Green Party, Matt. You believe in things like healthcare for all. And so, why were the Democrats going after you? It seems like, maybe I could see them going after some right wingers who are going after school board positions. They want to keep those people off the ballot, but why would they want to keep you off the ballot? Maybe the Republicans would, but why the Democrats?
You would think that would be the case, right, Kyle? But it's certainly not, and it's very similar to what we've seen the Republicans do to the Libertarians across the country. In the same year in 2022, the Republican Party in Texas kept a good number of Libertarians off the ballot. I can't remember if they were successful or not, but there was, I think, a couple dozen Libertarians on the ballot that the Republicans in Texas were trying to keep off. And the idea being is twofold. One, both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, I guess it's threefold. They believe that a duopoly, a two-party system, is in their best interest, right? Roughly divide the electorate. You get half, we get half. Every 4 or 8 years, the White House turns over. The Congress, the Senate, and the House, they turn over fairly regularly in terms of who's in the majority. We've got a good thing going. If you look at governorships and state legislatures, roughly divided. I think Republicans have a little more, but we've got a good thing going here. Let's not allow anything that's going to disrupt what we possess. Right, the power that we have is only threatened by more democracy. The other aspect then is that they view their constituents as theirs. And in this left-right split that they maintain, right, this Democrat-Republican red-blue split that they maintain, well, anyone who's got red on them at all belongs, no matter the hue or the shade, belongs to the Republicans, and the same for the Democrats. So if you are on the left, which I think probably a lot of folks that who are listening to us right now don't subscribe to that left-right horizontal axis of political theory, because we understand that the real world is much more complex than that. But if you are on that axis, the Democrats own you. You belong to them. So they get very upset if somebody is trying to take away what they believe is theirs. So that is why they come after Greens and socialists and independents who advance things that they feel are in their spectrum, even though they're the complete opposite. So say one of the things that we would run on as a Green Party candidate is certainly the environment, climate change, a Green New Deal. And so for us, Joe Biden, who has pumped more oil than any American president, actually, the United States, as of the last 5 years, pumps more oil than any other nation, and last year set the record for most amount of oil pumped by any nation. And then as well, we are the world's largest exporter of liquid natural gas. So those two things there mean that Joe Biden is actually in opposition to where we as Greens or others, on the left are when it comes to environmental policy, climate policy, fossil fuel policy, energy policy, et cetera. And that's just one example. You can talk about healthcare, you can talk about the war on drugs, you can talk about imperialism. I mean, however you want to discuss it. What you find is if you took my campaign from a couple of years ago and you matched that up against my Democratic opponent and the Republican opponent and looked at the platform, you would likely see that the Democrat and the Republican had much more overlap with each other in terms of their policies than the Democrat had overlap with me in terms of our policies or our platform. And I would say the same for the Libertarian as well. The Libertarian candidate in 2022. He had the Republican candidate, I should say, had much more overlap with the Democratic candidate than the Republican candidate had with the Libertarian candidate. And this gets to the third aspect: is who then are we threatening? And what we are threatening is we're threatening the donor base of these parties. So they do not want someone having the ability to speak about Medicare for all or healthcare for all or universal healthcare or anything. They do not want to hear at all anywhere in the campaign that between roughly 50,000 Americans die every year because they don't have health insurance, right? They don't want that anywhere near the campaign because that affects their donor base's profits, and that, besides their own power, is their primary thing to protect, not just in their campaign but when they're in office.
Right. So, I guess one of the dynamics here, Matt, is kind of how it goes is, and not that these are necessarily trivial issues, but the small differences between the Democrats and Republicans maybe do, for some people, impact their lives more than the things they have in common. But in the grand scheme of things, the issues that they have in common, say the persecution of Julian Assange, the, maintaining this massive world empire, probably have a bigger impact on our lives, on our economy, and just how our society functions and how our culture is driven and functions than anything else. And here we have complete agreement almost universally between the two parties. And, one of the issues that you have really highlighted in your activism has been the persecution of Julian Assange and the U.S. trying to bring him to the U.S. and what that would mean for the First Amendment. When you do this program, along with very good friend of the show, Kelly Lane. She's been on the show before. You can follow her on Twitter at Kelly Swords, and that's where she posts these videos and these candidate forums that you two do. So go ahead, talk a little bit about candidates for Assange, but why you champion the Assange cause overall.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. I champion the Assange cause overall because, I support a free press. I believe in journalism. I hold very dear our First Amendment rights to free speech. I also hold dear the ideals that government shouldn't be transparent, that when you have hidden or secret government, that leads to tyranny, it leads to corruption, it leads to the public becoming second or third class citizens behind, say, in the case of our republic, if you want to call it that, corporations, say, right, or the elites. Right. I mean, certainly, I don't think many people would argue with the fact that when it comes to the terms of the pecking order, the hierarchy in the United States, American citizens are not at the top of that order. There are elites and special interests that dominate that order. So, and I think, too, also, as you see with regards to the Julian Assange case, how it connects to other issues. So very often when Kelly and I do our program, Candidates for Assange, we often end up talking about Fourth Amendment issues because we see the government's use of censorship always intertwined with assaults on privacy. Right. So you have both First Amendment and Fourth Amendment concerns that we're constantly talking about. And with Candidates for Assange, the idea is to give a platform to federal candidates who are running across the country. Most of them are House candidates. We've had a couple Senate candidates who are willing to speak out for Julian Assange and press freedom in their campaigns. And it's a great program. We do it Thursday nights at 9 p.m. You can find it on Twitter. Go to @Candidates for Assange. It's actually @Candidates for ASA, ASSA. So candidates, the number 4 ASA. And follow it there. And Thursday nights, 9 p.m. Eastern. You'll find a lot of really terrific candidates coming on who, deserve support, not just locally, not just within their districts or their states, but nationally, because they are willing to talk about this issue of Julian Assange, the larger issue of press freedom, what that means for us in the United States, in a manner that the candidates for, typically we have independent or third party candidates. We do have some Democratic and Republican candidates, but, this is an issue that many candidates, should say most candidates within the major parties, the corporate parties, will not touch.
Right, and just because somebody's running as a Democrat or a Republican doesn't necessarily mean that the rest of their or all their politics are awful. At times, I've known people who are pretty strict libertarians who will run as a Republican just because, you have to deal less with the ballot access. And as you said before, if you're running even like a local or congressional campaign as a third party, and maybe you have a wife and kids and this is something you're going to try to do on the side now that you have a little bit of time to prioritize, and suddenly you're getting sued by the Democrats or the Republicans, well, maybe you just get a lot less interest in it because when you got a lawsuit coming down on you and things like that, other things probably have to take priority. So I have to
Right.
imagine this is, just a part of that overall censorship and everything too.
Kyle, what we found, I've found is that if we do have candidates that are Democrats or Republicans, they're usually candidates in heavily gerrymandered districts where the party that they're representing is choosing not to support anyone, right? So you mainly will have a Democrat who is in a Republican plus 15 or plus 20 district, and the Democratic Party is not going to support anyone there. So basically, someone who is not part of the party establishment is able to run. Right. And this way, they're able to speak and have a platform that is more in line with their own ideals, their own principles, what they believe is right, as opposed to hewing to whatever the party platform is in order to get the support from the party that they need to be the representative. So what we usually see, again, is Democrats or Republicans who are in districts where their party is otherwise not going to have a candidate. And that just shows, again, this need for a multi-party democracy, this need to break this stranglehold that the two-party system has on our electoral system, because it really provides such a corrupted form of democracy, such a rotten form of electoral politics, where it's so dominated by money. So the requirement is to keep to the party. Otherwise, you will not be able to run or be on the ballot. And, what choice does that ultimately give to the voters?
Right. Well, and I guess that, we could go back to Assange this way too, where it's really a form of lawfare. Not only are they waging against, our own people trying to run for Congress, but against Julian Assange, where with I guess the most recent UK High Court ruling, they've managed to kick the can down the road another 6 weeks to 2 months, and then maybe we'll have another ruling from the High Court. But it seems like there's going to be another hearing, then they'll probably issue another ruling in a couple of months, and who knows how many more months after that. So what do you think's going to happen here, Matt? It kind of seems to me, and the people that I've talked to about Assange on the show have kind of echoed this view that what the Biden administration wants is not to have to deal with this. They don't want this on their plate, particularly in 2024. And so the plan is to just at least get the UK to keep him until November.
That's right. That's right. I think what they've wanted for a long time is, as Misty Winston says, a head on a stake, right? And so however they can get that head on a stake, they'll take it. I don't think they actually want this thing to go to trial in the United States. The uncertainty of it, the fact that it's such a clear violation of the First Amendment, that this would upend our concepts of journalism and press freedom. This is why the Obama administration never saw an indictment against Julian Assange, because of, as they called it, the Obama administration called it, the New York Times problem. That if you go after Julian Assange, then you have to go after, or you have the opportunity, or you have the precedent to go after the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, et cetera. So what I think I'm in agreement with the others, Kyle. I think they want to see this thing stretched out through November. I think what many would like to see is for him to die at Belmarsh, which is the prison he's being held in the UK, for him to die in Belmarsh, because then that leaves it open-ended. You still have your head in your stake. They still made an example of him. Do you want, as a journalist, do you want to risk having to go through what Julian Assange went through? And it's still not adjudicated. There's been no court rulings either way on this, so the government can still continue to pursue this type of prosecution and persecution and oppression of journalism, because there's nothing holding them back in terms of a court ruling. So I think that's the best case that those in power want, is to see Julian Assange perish in prison, to die in prison, because that gives them everything that they wanted, that he's made an example of. The threat against journalists is still there, and there was never anything conclusively decided, so they can continue to go forward with this. And even if he's not extradited, the government can still get a win out of that, because while it was a British court that didn't extradite him, or say the Brits choose to not extradite him, but then somehow he's granted an appeal in the European Court of Human Rights. Well, then it's the Europeans who didn't extradite him. That doesn't mean our legal case, right? The validity of what we are trying to do here has been quashed. So even with Julian Assange not being extradited, it allows the government to say, well, it was never finalized, it was never adjudicated, we can still continue to pursue this, we never got definitive legal reasoning. And they still had their head on a stake, because who wants to go through what Julian has gone through for the last decade? Who wants to put themselves through that? And so it has an incredible chilling effect that we've already seen. We know this. It's already had an effect on journalists. And this is where we end up talking a lot about how the Fourth Amendment has evolved here, because it's the ability of the government to then spy on us, right? The ability of the government to monitor and surveil everything we are doing, whether we are just normal citizens, whether it's guys like you and I who are running our mouths about what the empire is doing, or whether it's journalists who are practicing their trade. The government has the ability to watch everything, and that we know that's already had a chilling effect. So you see how First Amendment and Fourth Amendment concerns, the confluence of that, how they collide here, and why it's so important for us to stand behind Julian Assange, stand behind WikiLeaks, stand in support of press freedom, because it's just not censorship that we're up against. It's also an invasion of our privacy.
Right. And one of the things, Misty was on this show a couple of weeks ago, and one of the things that we always discuss, Matt, is, if, you're just like with your campaign, the legal stuff taken away from that, what Assange's persecution has done to WikiLeaks and what it could have done had he was just an average journalist doing what he had done the years prior, what war crimes he would have exposed, say, and what he would have exposed what the U.S. was doing in Syria and Libya, and particularly corruption around Ukraine. We don't know where a lot of the war weapons and a lot of the money that we sent to Ukraine is going, but something tells me that WikiLeaks might have told the people if they were there. The Israeli government is doing a lot of really, really bad things in Gaza, and you wonder what the American government knows about it, and you wonder if Assange was out and WikiLeaks was, again, just functioning as the agency it should be functioning as, what they would be able to do and expose, and how much that agency has been kneecapped, particularly over the past 5 years, when he wasn't even allowed to be, in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, which was its own form of really imprisonment and punishment. And so let's talk about Gaza. And I know you have a really important thing going on here. There's going to be a flotilla headed to Gaza, and I believe you're doing some traveling as a part of that. So what's your role in this? What's the flotilla going to do? And just give us all the details here.
Yeah, so there will be later this month an international civilian aid flotilla to break the siege of Gaza. So since 2008, there has been the International Freedom Flotilla Coalition, made up of 12 different nations that have near annually sent boats to Gaza in order to break the blockade, bring material support, bring humanitarian assistance, as well as bring technical assistance, right? Bring healthcare workers and engineers, people to help remedy and rectify what the blockade of Gaza has been doing to the people of Gaza. That blockade, in practice since 2007 by the Israelis. And so later this month, there will be an emergency flotilla that will sail to break that blockade. It will bring more than 5,500 tons of cargo. It will have several hundred participants, humanitarian observers, as well as those with various backgrounds that are beneficial, that need what we need to get into Gaza. So healthcare workers, engineers, those types of people. I'll be involved in the sense that I'm going to go overseas and I'm going to help for a couple of weeks from the ground, from the port. I'll help coordinate media and do other administrative tasks. But the reality is that we have several hundred brave men and women who understand the severity of what they are sailing into. but are compelled to do so because they are witnessing genocide. Right? They are witnessing this ongoing deliberate starvation, as well as this collective punishment that is part of an ethnic cleansing campaign. And these, several hundred men and women are willing to put themselves on those boats and sail to break that siege, to break that blockade in order to help the people of Gaza. And if people are interested in supporting, you can go to U.S. Boats to Gaza. Just Google U.S. Boats to Gaza, and you'll find the American contingent there. Or you can Google Freedom Flotilla Coalition, and that is the actual umbrella, the coalition of the 12 nations involved.
So, we don't have to get into too many details, and I don't want to get anybody in the project in trouble or anything. But one of the things that has been a constant complaint of aid groups in Gaza is there are real restrictions on the aid that the Israelis are letting in through their checkpoints, right?
Right.
Maternity kits, antibiotics, anesthetics. They claim, scissors. They claim these items
Mhm.
are dual use. And so I guess, a member of Hamas could take antibiotics. And so that means we're going to deprive a child who maybe has severe burns over a large portion of their body and needs daily surgeries. And now these are getting like really horrific situations going
Right.
on here. People who really need these anesthetics and antibiotics. And so, I would understand if the flotilla had to reduce what they were sending to follow the Israeli compliant or mandates, or if they were going to try to bring some of these really important banned items in.
Right. We are not complying with the Israelis in any way, shape, or form. That goes for whether what we're bringing, how we're doing it, where our vessels are headed to, et cetera. The Israelis are in clear violation of international law. We are well within the rights of the international community to do something, to respond. We feel that the ruling from the International Court of Justice in January demanding action to stop the genocide in Gaza, it provides us with the authority to act as we are acting. Also, too, there are certainly other principles that come from moral or natural law that advise us to act as we are acting. But in no shape, way, or form, Kyle, are we complying with the Israelis. And the urgency of what's being done here by the flotilla, by the international aid flotilla, is made all the more apparent, of course, right, by the fact that after the Israelis killed 7 World Central Kitchen food members, which brings to almost 200 the number of aid workers the Israelis have killed in the last 6 months in Gaza. Plus, as we've all seen, the dozens of attacks on civilians who have been trying to receive aid, most especially the flour massacre from a month or two ago, where more than 100 Gazans were slaughtered as they queued up to get flour from a truck. The Israelis is deliberately murdering people, whether they're aid workers or starving people. The urgency following the departure of World Central Kitchen, the departure of Arena, the dismantling of UNRWA, the purposeful dismantling of UNRWA through the Israeli lies about UNRWA being a terrorist organization, which the U.S. and many Western nations are still going along with. It's been great that several nations have turned around and say, no, we are going to fund UNRWA again, Japan being the most recent, I believe. But, in light of all that, with the reduction in the ability for aid to be provided to the people of Gaza as they are deliberately starved and as they are, being killed off in this organized murder campaign, the importance of what the flotilla is going to be doing, breaking that blockade, again, bringing 5,500 tons of cargo. To give you an example of how much 5,500 tons of cargo is, the World Central Kitchen boat, the barge that they sailed over, was 200 tons. So we are bringing, many orders of magnitude greater than what has been brought in by sea already. And this will make a great difference in the needs of the Gazan people. And so what we need is the international community to support us in our efforts to get that aid ashore in terms of providing protection for us, in the sense of not flying air cover or anything like that, but meaning in the sense of putting the pressure on Israel that's necessary to allow our vessels to reach shore to provide help to the Gazan people.
So, two things there. The one is, of course, I'm really happy to hear that there's medical professionals going, because from what I understand, the Israelis have really tightened on who they're giving visas to and have really restricted the medical workers who are
Mm.
able, and just aid workers in general, who are able to enter Gaza. The World Central Kitchen people only were able to because they really heavily complied with the Israeli government. And the
Right.
leader of that organization happens to be personal friends with Joe Biden.
Yeah.
But so one of the things you highlight there and said several times is how brave the people on this flotilla are. And when you told me you were involved with it, I was worried because, well, I like you a lot, Matt, and I don't want to see anything bad happen to you. And the Israelis, not only have we seen that they're willing to kill aid workers who are actually coordinating with the IDF, but have attacked freedom flotillas in the past. And so I guess there's significant concern among the people going. And uh,
Right.
I guess what is there an anticipation that the Israelis are going to try to attack or intercept this ship, or how do you guys see this playing out?
Certainly, well, first of all, it is not a suicide mission by any means. So this is not we are going to ram our way through the Israeli naval vessels, and it's certainly not a suicide mission. We're not going to risk any undue harm to any of the participants. However, um, as you said, the Israelis in the past have intercepted these votes aggressively. In 2010, their naval commandos killed 10 participants in a flotilla mission, murdered them cold-blooded on the decks of a ship they boarded. They have rammed other ships, and normally what they do is they seize control of this. They board the ships, they seize control of the ships in international waters. So clear violation. They hijack the ships and they commandeer the ships, bring them to Israel, usually to the port of Ashdod, and then they process the participants, hold them in prison for a few days, a week or so, and then deport them. We don't know how the Israelis are going to react in this case. Certainly, the actions we have seen the Israelis over decades, but then most especially the last 6 months during this genocide, make us understand the Israelis are capable of anything. They have no concern whatsoever for international law, and they really don't have any concern for how the rest of the international world, the international community views them. They have just, to put it politely, thumbed their noses at everyone who expresses dismay or disgust at their actions. But there still is a lot of leverage that can be put on Israel by the international community, including the use of sanctions, and as well as other actions that can further isolate Israel. So we do not know how the Israelis will react, but we'll be prepared for being boarded, for being detained, for the ships being aggressively pursued and contacted. But again, it's not a suicide mission by any means.
I guess, maybe one thing that is good is that the Israelis do seem to have gotten the message that the one thing they're not allowed to do is kill Western aid workers. As
Mhm.
you mentioned there, 193 aid workers have been killed by Israel in 6 months. UNRWA, I think, has said well over 135 or 150 of their own
Right.
staff members have been killed. We've seen 100 journalists killed, many members of journalist families, many doctors killed, ambulance drivers, the
Right.
police officers in Gaza. And so, the Palestinians, who were the civil servants of their society, have been slaughtered. But when one American and a couple of Brits and an Australian get killed, and again, it may have something to do with the head of this organization is somebody who circulates in DC. So,
Yeah.
maybe it has more to do with that than the color of the people's involved skin. But it does seem to like be a kind of an undeniable fact here that we're only taking notice of a very small fraction of the casualties here. And so maybe that will make the Israelis essentially feel they have to stand down to some effect. So, I hope this goes well. Best of luck to you and everybody who actually is heading into Gaza, because I mean, I can't imagine, the trauma just from going into Gaza, much less the potential risks of this deployment. I want to ask you about, why do you feel like this issue is so important? I'll kind of just let you take it wherever you want. There's so much happening in Gaza. I can ask you about 100 different little things the Israelis are doing, but I'll just,
Right.
what do you feel is like the real thing that why you want to do this?
Well, been concerned about issues relating to Palestine for quite a while. I when my Some of my Jewish friends in college who had been to Israel, whose parents had taught them the reality of the situation there, they disabused me my notions of what was going on there. I came away with I read if people are familiar with Leon Uris's Exodus and Herman Wouk's The Glory and the Hope. This romanticized ideal of what the creation of Israel was about. And I had Jewish friends who told me, no, those are fairy tales, man. That's a myth. Those are stories told to excuse land theft. And but it wasn't to really, I guess, 2017, Kyle, when I went to Palestine on a Veterans for Peace delegation. I was in occupied East Jerusalem in the West Bank, and saw the occupation firsthand, and saw how the occupation was no different than our occupations of Iraq and Afghanistan. Yeah, we can argue about the details and everything, but the overall moral aspects of it, the overall human experience that was occurring there was no different than what we have been doing in Iraq and Afghanistan. And then particularly too, even more so, being on the other side of that, spending time with Palestinians, spending 3 weeks there, living with Palestinians, being in their homes, eating their foods, seeing the humiliation that they had to endure daily, as well then too, meeting those who had lost people to the occupation. Then it became very personal for me. And, witnessing this these last 6 months, I think, one, the inevitability of it. I think many people, if you went back 6 months and a day or two, you talked about the possibility of something like this happening. Many observers would say, yeah, you just need the right circumstances to get this in motion. So I think that inevitability, coupled with my personal experience, and then as well, Kyle, as many of us, this this understanding of the role of the United States in this. And I don't even like saying the United States is complicit, because the amount of support that we're giving Israel across all lines of operation, whether it be diplomatic, political, media, economic, military, intelligence, makes us not just complicit, but makes us an active participant. We're doing everything other than actually having our guys pulling putting fingers on triggers. So our role in this too is another thing for me that makes this so very important. And I think overall, besides, along with, and paramount, this is paramount, of course, the great suffering of the Palestinian people, the great injustice, this incredible moral horror that we're watching, and what these people are going through. There is also this idea of what we as humanity are doing, our inaction, our ability to be silent and passive as nations in the West because it's best for our corporate profits, or because a foreign lobby has taken possession of our political system, or because there has been this dominant narrative that ties into American exceptionalism, and this is part of the American empire. Remember, Israel is established, or the Palestinian Mandate is established as part of the British Empire. The Americans, we take over the British Empire. So those interests become our interests. And so you roll those together and you see the great imperative here in terms of not just what's occurring now, but what does this portend for the future? If we don't stop this, and if we don't make it so that this can never happen again, there will be other things like Gaza that will occur. May not look exactly like it, maybe in other parts of the world, but it will be a fundamental, violation of any moral ethic, any international or federal law that we have, as well as just the destruction of who we pretend to be and who we know we could be if we just weren't controlled, again, by corporations, foreign lobbies, a foreign policy establishment that is just full of crackpot realists, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, great point, Matt, because some people will say, "Oh, we had to stop Russia from invading Ukraine to, hold up these international norms." But then when
Right.
it comes to Israel, they're allowed to bomb the Iranian consulate in Damascus. And isn't it interesting that same week, Ecuador went into the
Right.
Mexican embassy in Ecuador and took the former vice president, violating their sovereignty. And so
Right.
it does seem that there are consequences, especially when you have this kind of rogue piece of the American empire doing it, because other pieces of that empire understand that it's going to look really hypocritical and bad for Washington to just criticize one and not the other. Now, just, to wrap up here, Matt, do you have any, I don't want to say predictions is maybe the wrong word, but any idea as to if there's going to be enough pressure put on Joe Biden in the United States to get the U.S. to pull the plug on it? Because it seems to me that the White House is still in this game where they're doing everything they can, short of altering policy, to stave off the political pressure, but not actually do anything.
I think they've realized they grossly miscalculated 6 months ago, the White House. I think the White House's calculations 6 months ago were that whatever progressive voters we lose because of this, if we lose 2, 3, 4, 5 million progressive voters around the country because of Palestine, because of Gaza, that well, the loss of the Israeli lobby would be more severe, right? So it's better for us to lose those voters than to lose the Israeli lobby support. And they probably thought this thing would be done by Christmas because, we always expect wars to be done by Christmas, right? And, then they could move on. And the problem is it's not done. And they have still Rafah to go. The Israelis still want to destroy Rafah. How can Netanyahu and others in his coalition say they finished a job, declared victory, if they haven't done to Rafah what they've done to Khan Yunis and Gaza City and the rest of Gaza? So I think the White House, the Biden re-election campaign is very. They're in a bad position right now politically, because the longer this goes on, as the campaign increases, the more often Joe Biden is going to continue to be disrupted at local events. When he goes out and, when he comes here to Raleigh, North Carolina, when he goes to Tucson and goes to Minneapolis or wherever he goes, he is going to be disrupted by protesters. And maybe CNN and MSNBC are not going to show that, but who will show it? It will be the local television networks. And the folks who watch CNN and MSNBC and Fox, they've got their minds made up about November 24. But the people who get their news and learn about the campaign, who haven't made their mind up, they watch local news. And so this is a real concern for the Biden administration, this thing extending, right? This genocide continuing. It makes it very difficult for the Biden administration to begin a campaign when every time Joe Biden opens his mouth, he gets interrupted by a protester. And if any of you folks out there are those folks doing it, God bless you and keep it up. So I think that calculation they made 6 months ago, it wasn't meant to go on this long. And we were supposed to also be in control of the media. And that's another big thing that comes out of us for understand. Kyle, when you look at the public opinion numbers on what's happening in Gaza, and you see, Gallup put it out a week or so ago, 55% of Americans are opposed to Israel's military operation in Gaza. That's the way Gallup described it, Israel's military operation in Gaza. 55% of Americans are opposed to it, which is a big difference. I mean, the percent that supported it back in November, it dropped by 16 points. So, when you look at that in the context of the talking points, the pro-Israel bias that dominates the major corporate media, as well as essentially most of our politicians are reading a script given to them by AIPAC and the Israel lobby. The fact that 55% of Americans are against what's happening in Gaza when the corporate media and almost all their politicians are telling them otherwise, that shows the strength of independent journalism, right? Like yours, like antiwar.com. Right? I mean, this is why this stuff is so important. And I don't think the White House understood that 6 months ago. I think they thought that they could control the narrative, that they had media control on this. And then, of course, we could do whole other shows on this, right? This is how we end up with wanting to have a TikTok ban, right? But this also ties back into Julian Assange as well, right? And it just ties back into the importance of what's going on in terms of the government's persecution and prosecution of Julian Assange, and how, when you were talking earlier, Kyle, about how what would it be like if we had WikiLeaks? Well, what we have now are people with cell phone cameras, and with the ability to tell the story themselves and to share that. And that's where I think with the Assange case, that a third thing comes in that's really important. Another pillar of that is the U.S. government's relationship with technology companies. And they see that and they're afraid of it. And so they're doing everything they can to, yeah, you can have your cell phone camera, Kyle Anzalone. You can have your podcast on Skype or whatever, but we're going to control how you can distribute it. This way, your words don't get out. This way, you can't inform people. And that's something that we have to be really cognizant of, is that whatever we do to improve the situation, whatever we do to go against government corruption, increase transparency, tell a story that is inconvenient or uncomfortable for the powers that be, they will do everything they can to shut that down. And so I think that is such an important thing that we've seen in the last 6 months, is the ability of independent media to tell the story of Gaza. And we have to expect that that will be a lesson that the establishment, that the elites, that the empire is learning. And I think this TikTok ban is only the first of what we're going to see coming in terms of trying to get control over people like you, basically. You know, you and antiwar.com and the Libertarian Institute, right? All the great work you're doing. They want to, if not shut it down, restrict it so that, you know, you're essentially ineffective.
Yeah. I 100% agree with you, and I'm very worried, especially because, and I guess this is the good news, in my, age group, Americans 35 and younger, the majority of us are now not in favor of continuing to support Israel. I think if I were to, just go out in a bar with a group of my friends for maybe the first time ever, my position isn't going to be the radical one when it comes to Gaza. People are going to look and be like, oh yeah, that seems to be what I agree with as well. And, I worry there's going to be two consequences of that. One, the U.S. government is going to realize that, these social media power platforms and anyone that emerge could be too powerful. And I think what they really want is control over the existing platforms. They've learned that, suppression, getting rid of Parler really isn't the solution, but rather co-opting and controlling the narrative that's on the existing platforms is what they want to do. And then my other concern is that if I were sitting in Tel Aviv, you may make a very cold calculation here that the Americans that support you unconditionally are Joe Biden's age and older. They are dying off.
Yes.
And,
yes.
Maybe you decide that you do what you got to do now. You just go ahead and finish off the ethnic cleansing in Gaza, because there's not going to be a government in the U.S. in even, 4, 8, 12 years that they're ever as supportive of Israel again. And I think what they really maybe want to do here is finish this up. They're going to get rid of Netanyahu, and they're going to be like, well, good thing that guy is gone. He was a real lunatic, huh? Now here's this nice fella, Benny Gantz or Naftali Bennett, and you Americans are just going to eat him up like, he's a regular Barack Obama. And I think that's what they're going to try to pull on us, and I'm very concerned that's how it's going to play out. But Matt, any final comments? If not, tell people where they can find you. I know you do a lot of stuff, and I want to recommend that people do not miss your weekly appearance on Judging Freedom. You're on almost every Tuesday afternoon, and I mean, just absolutely fantastic. It's one of the things I feel like I can't miss, because I want your perspective on what's happening, particularly in Gaza, but also Ukraine as well.
Thanks, Kyle. I really appreciate you saying that. Yeah, Tuesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern, I'm on with the judge. And then you're on as well. Are you on Thursdays?
It's all over the place. It's usually Monday or Thursdays. I'm going to be on. So for anybody watching this show now, I was on yesterday afternoon. Head on over to the channel and watch the show.
Okay, because I listen to you every week as well. I mean, you're one of the ones that I make sure that I hear when I'm walking my dogs and listening to the podcast. I always make sure to listen to yours, because it's so informative and it gives me such a great perspective. But that, again, that's all the work. As people can tell, I'm a big fan of everything you all are doing at antiwar.com. I mean, if not for antiwar.com, I would have a real problem doing my job. So, I mean, it's terrific. I will say one thing. I want to say one more thing about the Israelis. They're even though they're, we got to be concerned about what's the next stage and what's the next part of their plan. Because certainly it could be the destruction of Rafah, but then what? And I think, the ideas that we heard floated about 4 months ago or so about, quote, voluntary migration, unquote. this idea of making things so miserable, making Gaza uninhabitable, which is what they've been doing for 6 months, so that people leave Gaza and they ship them to wherever they can go. I'm pretty certain the Egyptians and Jordanians won't take too many if they take any at all. I think they will take some, but not too many. But the idea that maybe Ecuador would take 100,000. And then if people remember, within the $95 billion foreign war supplemental that the Senate passed almost 2 months ago now, or a month and a half ago, and that Speaker Johnson is supposedly going to be bringing to the fore at some point. There is money in there, billions in there for humanitarian assistance, and that includes, right? So is it possible that the Israeli diplomats right now are sitting in, again, say Ecuador, we'll continue to pick on Ecuador, sitting with Ecuador saying, if you take 100,000 Palestinians, the Americans will give you $100 million or whatever. I mean, so in terms of, I think that's where they could be heading with this. It's hard to tell what their plans are, but I just can't see them accepting the Israelis accepting the destruction of Gaza in it being the end itself, that the collective punishment was all that they wanted. I really think that this was their opportunity, maybe their last opportunity, as you were saying, to carry out one more phase of the greater Israel project. We'll never have a better time than now to do this. Let's do it now. So that said, people can follow me on Twitter at Matthew P. Ho, P as in Patrick. And I work with the Eisenhower Media Network. So Google Eisenhower Media Network and it will come up. And Kyle, I thank you. I appreciate being on with you.
All right, thank you, Matt. And you're on Substack as well. People don't forget that. And we reprint Matt on antiwar.com if it's a foreign policy article. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Kyle.